Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to start the session now. My name is Keiko Yamanaka. I'm from Kathmandu University, School of Arts. We've done some migration-related studies for the past 10-12 years, so this is one lecture that I'm personally also looking forward to. And also because there's another connection, I spent some years in Japan myself, some 12 years as a student and as a professional before coming back to Nepal. So I have my own memories and experiences from that country. So that's why I look forward to Dr. Keiko Yamanaka's lecture today. Let me introduce her first of all. Briefly, you already have I'm sure received the flyer with her introduction there, but Dr. Yamanaka is a scholar who in the recent days has focused largely on immigration and multiculturalism in Asia. She teaches at the Department of Ethnic Studies and of Global Studies at the University of California, Berkeley. She is from Japan, as you know, and therefore has worked extensively regarding the immigrants in Japan, residing in Japan. Japan, as you know, is getting more and more multicultural in the recent days. Very different to what it used to be in my days when I used to live and study in Japan. And that's what I want to hear from Dr. Yamanaka as to how the situation is today, so that maybe later in the discussion I can share some of my own reflections. She has studied in, she says, Nikkei Filipino migration to Japan, a lot of studies there. About Nikkei Brazilians, Nepalese, and as you basically looking at how Japan as a society is changing, largely due to the East Asian migration and also more and more from South Asia in the recent years. So without much ado, and we can discuss more about her own experiences apart from the lecture that she's going to give today. And she has a plethora of publications. One I am personally aware of is the Window Over Water that she wrote some years ago. When I was doing my own migration studies, that was the literature that I followed. When she talked about the East Asian communities in Japan, but other literature, other publications as well in the recent days. So without much ado, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome Professor Yamanaka to give you a lecture. Please.
Thank you very much for a kind introduction, and thank you for coming to my talk. I have a total of 37 slides, and I will go rapidly. As you might have noticed, in the first page of slides, I added South Korea in addition to Japan, because I am interested in Korea, because Japan and Korea are very similar in many ways. But yet I found, in terms of political culture, the two countries are far apart. So I'm interested in this kind of civil activism. Influences, shapes the governmental policy, which I saw in Korea more visibly. So I will address that issue a little bit. So I will go quickly each slide. So this one is about, I think I will stand up, is it okay? And is there a mic for this one? Or so can you hear me very well?
But since they're behaving...
Oh, you have, okay.
I'll do this.
Oh, okay. So I think it's, yeah. Here, as introduction referred to, I am interested in migration issues. In teaching in Asian American Studies program at Ethnic Studies, I do teach on gender and generation in Asian American families. But this one, I teach on immigration issues and multiculturalism in East Asia. Especially, I see the handful of rich East Asian countries, including Singapore, and also the large population countries and a strong pressure of sending their youth, relatively well-educated youth, to abroad. And I'm interested in this kind of tug of war between the two regions. So this is the kind of thing I teach. And what I found is that Singapore, Malaysia, Hong Kong, and Taiwan have a very strong policy and implement them by words, by law. But when it comes to East Asia, Japan and South Korea, I found ambiguous. Well, it's supposed to be very democratic society, and they can't really force very draconian rule on migrant workers or foreigners, but they are very mixed in many ways. So this is something that I'm interested in, that kind of room in the migration policies, different from Singaporean style. Moving, next one. To here. So yeah, maybe, yeah, okay. So this is I'm just trying to think of Nepal as a case study. And Nepal uses these days labor migration abroad, especially for part of household strategy for survival in the time of political, environmental, many other changes. And so remittances becoming bigger as a total than ODA. This is something I heard, but also many issues coming up. Labor migration alone does not develop a country, and this also indicates that fewer working age men are left in the villages. And one thing I have noticed was that Philippines is a model that many other countries, especially in the Southeast Asian countries, are chasing after. That is, labor as the first most important export to other countries. So Nepal may following that kind of steps. That's an interesting question. Next, please. And so here's a Nepal as a labor sending countries. I do not go in details. My statistics may be a little bit outdated. That I heard in 2011, a quarter of the total household have a migrant absentee. And then, so the destinations, as you know very well, India is easy for the Nepalis to reach. And the Middle East, which hosts more than 1 million Nepali workers, but this is not the areas that many would like to go. And then Malaysia is another country. And in East Asia, number is small, but it's rising as a unique, kind of very pulling, attractive place for a lot of middle to low middle class workers. So that's what I hear. And then, so my question, why do I study Nepalese? Not only just because I did it earlier, but it's now an interesting question. And why they are in East Asia. And then, to me, Nepal is a kind of small enough to follow what is happening. It, to me, provides a case study for understanding dynamics between household strategy and immigration policy. Immigration policy in East Asia is the one that is, next please, yeah. So why Japan and Korea? To me, both countries are converging in terms of goals of receiving migrant workers. Both are really having a serious low fertility, as well. That means labor force is aging, and even in the case of Japan, population is declining. And this is an imminent threat to the population and the society, but yet that these both countries are sort of geared up with ideology of strong nationalistic, the ethnic, social homogeneity that must be kept. So the immigrant workers for, say, unskilled workers, are welcome as a muscle labor, but not the labor, but they have to go out after they finish their contract. So which we call labor circulation or circular migration. So Japan and Korea are relatively recent countries of immigration. As we go to Japan, this is not the right to say, because Japan was an imperial, had a once, excuse me, Japan had an empire, that means by nature, multinational, multi-ethnic, multilingual, huge empire. So it was once a very diverse population. But soon after the war ended, Japan suddenly became a single nation with one population, one culture, one language, which is not really true. There are always some Chinese and Koreans lived in Japan. So Koreans are very critical population for the Japan in terms of immigration policy. But in terms of globalized migration that visited Japan in the late 1980s to 1990s, Japan didn't know what to do with it. So the next one is that, can you go back to just one more? Yeah. So in terms of convergence, two countries, Japan and Korea, being recent countries of immigration, copied, Japan first copied the United States, the immigration policies a little bit. And then it introduced a system called industrial trainees. The system that was copied by Korea in the early 1990s. So industrial trainees means they are not workers, so they are not really paid for labor market wages. So all kinds of issues are in the programs, in the system of industrial trainees. But divergence is seen in terms of implementation. As I talk about all these different programs that open to Nepali workers and many other workers, Japan has not only technical interns, now it's going to introduce, has introduced a new system, specific skills, and students, international students, and family stay, and then all these people, different nationalities come through, usually recruiting agencies of many forms, that is pretty much market run. The government does not intervene very much, and as you might have noticed, that Prime Minister Abe is very adamant that Japan is not the country of immigration. He still says that even this April, that immigration door for unskilled workers is open now, yet Japan is not the country of immigration. Whereas Korea, once it suffered a lot from the programs in industrial training systems, learned quickly because it produced so many undocumented migrant workers. So it quit that industrial training system in the early 2000 and introduced employment permit system. So which I will talk about that a little later. So government, Ministry of Labor has a grip, tight grip over the number of people and the nationalities of migrant workers coming in to South Korea. And also there's no intermediate agency. It's very different from the Japan's institution of implementing the similar goals. Please, next one. The next thing that I feel very passionate, interesting about this is civil activism. Two countries indicate, this is something I never knew until I went to Korea in the middle of 2000. Japan, yes, labor unions are active in supporting migrant workers, negotiating with employers and many other institutions, standing for the rights of migrant workers. But the often most important groups of citizens who who are interested in migrant workers are, say, socially concerned Japanese citizens, forming a small group of teaching migrant kids Japanese language, or helping them celebrating some religious events, more sort of cultural, religious issues. You don't really, hear much of a human rights top subject in Japan. And also Japanese civil societies are often lacking financial basis, small, localized, specific to specific issues. Whereas Korea, labor unions, including migrant workers' labor unions, and a lot of human rights organizations and religious groups, mostly Catholic, Protestant, have organized migrant centers. And they use a very confrontational method, strikes even, demonstrations, and many other methods of challenging government, which I saw in Korea. So my interest is, in this case, in this presentation, I'm interested in this kind of civil society background, how this kind of difference in the political culture affects the Nepali workers adapt to the countries. This is one issue I have in mind. Okay, next. So I started with Japan. I did the research in the 1990s to the early 2000s about Nepali workers in the central Japan, which we call Tokai. I happen to grow up in that area, so I have some interest as well as knowledge of the area. That's the area hosts many multinational corporations of automakers such as Suzuki, Honda, Yamaha, and Toyota is not too far from the areas. That means there are so many small factories that relate to the big factories owned by Toyota, Nissan, all that kind of things. That means there are many foreign workers. So I running into a small group of Nepalis, most of them middle-aged Tibeto-Burman language speakers from the middle hills of the western part, and then they working. They came to Japan with a tourist visa, overstayed the visa, which is illegal, and also took employment, which is illegal. They are undocumented. But for Japanese employers who suffer severe labor shortages at work, these people are highly valued workers. So this was an earlier stage of Nepalese labor migration in the 1990s. They knew they are sojourners. They had no ways to settle in Japan. So Japanese government, knowing, or local government or police, knowing the fact that migrant workers are highly valued by their local employers, didn't really exercise their authority to get rid of them. So this also another room for space that migrant workers are working, earning, and also they had lots of their own community activities. Next one. And this is, I'll show you, but the photos from my earlier research. One thing I'm showing is that first one is, excuse me, here, this is a line for undocumented migrant workers. And then there are, here this is going up, is a line, the total number of Japanese, Brazilians, and Peruvians. And knowing that Japan, a lot of employers are suffering from labor shortages, Japanese government opened the door to the people of Japanese descent, mostly in Latin America. So here, Nikkeijin, people of Japanese descent, started coming very, rapidly, and the cross point is somewhere around. And then that really drove a lot of undocumented migrant workers. It's down. And here, this is 2008. Japan suffered seriously in the recession. And that means a lot of migrant workers are dismissed and they went home, including Japanese Brazilians. And this is a, excuse me, sorry, what is quite significant, I still remember very well, is that this is migrant workers. Here I am, which I was still very young 20 years ago, and not really white anymore in that period. This is actually in the middle of the Hamamatsu city where I did a lot of research about them. On Sunday afternoon, these guys come to the bottom of the big bus station for getting together, or also sending their money back home through agent. And it's sometimes 100, 200 Nepalis are getting together. And then there was a small police box across from this square. And then they knew who these people are, but they didn't do anything. It's an interesting incident. And then this is something that I wrote about here, the cartoons from the commando post I wrote about. So this is Gurkha soldiers. So my article was from global warriors to global workers. And they did become global workers in Japan, cutting the fish, that means Japan, I assume, and peace-free. But what they are doing is pretty much dealing with the automobile parts on the assembly line. So this is an interview I was doing with a man who was forced to return, and in Pokhara he was contemplating what to do, what would be his next step. And he was married to a woman of Gurkha background in Hong Kong, so he had an access to go to Hong Kong. So this is my earlier study. Next one. And then when the recession hit Japan in 2007-2008, the Nepalis returned. So pretty much that was the end of my study on Nepalese community in Tokai. But something else was happening, which I was not completely aware. For various reasons, I didn't really follow up Nepalese migration to Japan. What was happening here is that number of Nepalese quickly rose, right? So in the two waves, 2006, 2009, and again 2013 to 15, as of June 2018, there are 85,000 registered Nepalese in Japan. So during this period, Nepal also went to all kinds of changes. Not only civil war ended, new constitution was introduced, and a big earthquake. Doesn't matter. Nepalis kept coming to Japan. So why? That was my interest. Who are these people? Next, please. And this is a more precise increase of the different groups. So three groups are identified. First, student, international students started coming about from the 2000 increased, and they are also increased after 2010s. And then next group was this completely new. So about 2006, 2007, skilled workers, that is, they worked as a chefs and cooks and dishwashers in the Indo-Nepal restaurants. The number of Indian restaurants increased quite dramatically. And then, so here, the number of, every year, quite large number of people started coming. And then also, following their husband, wives started to come. And so this is about 2010. This is primarily wives and also children. And then, so these are the three major groups. Next, please. And so, why Japan? I showed you three different visa categories of people. And then, so compared to most desired English-speaking, and then permanent residency possible, upward mobility possible, countries such as North America or Australia, UK, or EU countries, Japan. Why Japan? What's the positive features of Japan? Compared to India, Middle East, Japan is certainly more desired. So positive features. Tanaka, Professor Tanaka, who is a professor of Sophia University, who has done a lot of extensive research about Nepalese, says these things. That is, Japan at least does not require any language test. Okay, so it's easy to come in compared to Korea, which has a very rigorous competitive exam. And then Japan also allows multiple ways for the Nepali people to enter. They can come as a student, they can come as a chefs, and families stay, and the technical trainees. Nepal somehow doesn't send workers as technical trainees, but these three are most popular ways for Nepalis to come in. And then, though this is very important, for students, they are allowed to work 4 hours per day, 28 hours per week, in order to support their study and work, study in Japan. And so are spouses, wives, mostly wives of Japanese, wives of Nepalese chefs are allowed to work. This is a small hours, not really long hours of work, but it still helps to augment husband's income. And it also says Japan is a continuum of Asia. And then there is a sort of image of Japan as a modern country and safe, especially for women. So these are the pulling factors to Japan. The negative side, that is because these are not really regulated by the Japanese government, so the exploitative brokering structures and expensive cost for students, at least $15,000 at entry for the first year. For restaurant workers, with all the ethnic networks that they developed, migrant chefs would have to pay at least $20,000. And so, from the beginning, on arrival in Japan, migrant workers from Nepal are often indented, that means indentured. So, also these visa categories are relatively very, I would say, restricted. You can't change your one qualification to another so easily. So, job mobility is limited. And in Japan, it's a high living cost society, and it's a monolingual society. Not many people speak English, so social isolation is quite common. And a significant Japanese language barrier. This is important negative factor for the students to learn Japanese language, especially those from outside East Asian Chinese civilization. So next. And so I have this diversification of visas. They came as a tourist first, and then they came as a students, skilled workers, and families stay, and then 3 groups are legal. And the one were the so-called undocumented, and then there are new group of workers are emerging. Some of them, despite, which I will explain, despite all the hardships learning Japanese language in Japan, some succeed in learning and finishing Japanese language schools, or move on to a specific vocational schools and move on to universities. So there are increasing number of new professionals among Nepalese workers. This is a new group which we haven't really known much about. Okay, moving. And so here, just one more. So here I would say because there isn't really established way for the Nepalese to come, they have developed their own ways to come in Japan. So that means migrant networks as well as recruiters, brokers network have expanded, developed very quickly. And moving on, please. So the question of whether they are going to be sojourners, that means for temporary workers in Japan, or they are becoming sojourners. From sojourners to becoming settlers. From sojourners to settlers is a cliche in migration studies that is often used and discussed in the American context where everyone wants to permanent residence stay. But in the case of East Asia or Asia in general, becoming settler is a really difficult task to achieve. So in the case of Japan, so the skilled workers, restaurant workers, about this 16%, including families, these are 40%, more than 40%, and a student, and a new group of professionals, and then those who claim refugees. We can see that 4 categories of Nepalis. Those who may shift toward permanent settlers are the skilled workers and the families, which I discussed a little more. Okay, and let me talk about just first restaurant workers, cooks. So Dipesh Karol is a filmmaker who has done a lot about ethnic networks of chefs coming from Bagun, special village, down to Japan and urban Japan, and working in the ethnic, the Indo-Nepali restaurants. Okay, so, but as I said, these people often are indebted, and they have to pay a lot of money back by working, and so they are always working. Long hours of work in the kitchen, and low wages and hard work. They don't have job mobility. They cannot switch the job from being cook to work in the factories. And then also employers tend to act as a very sort of greedy, sometimes, there are good employers too, but they are also interested in expanding their own business in Japan for money. So visa is items for sales at the exorbitant cost. Okay, wives arrival. It's good to have the family come together, and then later on kids come because no one is taking care of kids at home. So children arrive. But the most important part of the wife's arrival is that they are allowed to work for 7 hours per day, which although they work at the minimum wages, but still it adds some income to the household. So another issue which often comes up in any immigrant community is that education of children, what schools that kids go, and where they keep their mother tongue. What about English speaking? Many Nepali kids are equipped with English ability, but they are in Japan. No one speaks Japanese in a daily life. So, okay, another news, which is not really anymore positive for them. Market is saturated. There are so many Indian Nepali restaurants. In my small hometown called Shizuoka, there are quite more than 10 Nepali restaurants. It's hard to imagine that how could survive. So the competition is keen. Moving on. And so one man, his name is Krishna. Actually, he's one of the Basnet, the dominant group in the running, also working in the restaurants in Japan. So he has gone to work in India, Saudi Arabia, Malaysia, and Japan. So he is a veteran of Migrant as chef. And he finally arrived in Japan, and then he now happily works in the curry shop owned by a very interesting sort of global-oriented Japanese businessman, and it's investing a lot of money in his curry shop. So he's happy in his work, and he said Japan is easy to live, or he's also earning a lot of money. And he said this is something that caught my attention. That is, religion is not strong in Japan, whereas India, Saudi Arabia, many other countries he worked, religion is very, very strong. So that restricted their social behavior. But whereas in Japan is not very secular in many ways. So he finds it free. He has a wife currently who is not working, and 2 daughters. So, and then well-connected Nepalese community, and then he has a lot of plans with his business owners. But despite all the good life that he enjoying currently in Japan, he tells me that he plans to return to Nepal. He wants to buy good land and start business in Pokhara for Japanese as well as tourists in Pokhara. So, but his interest, right now, he's very much concerned about a lot of issues that are coming up in Nepalese community. One, he kept complaining, why is it limited to work only 4 hours? Can you go to Japanese government to change the law? There's a no way. And then he also talked about a lot of his worry that his 2 daughters are Japanized. You know, the one is teenager, the other is still very young, 6 or 7 years old. I saw her playing at one event. She isn't really any different from any other Japanese kid. Happy to speak Japanese with her friends, Nepali kids running around. You know, so it's indicated. I understand the concern of his Krishna's concerns. So, and he also talks about too many Nepalese restaurants. So none is doing so well. Okay, next. So, educational choices for Nepalese children. Excuse me, I put this in order. There are a number of choices, but in fact, there are many. In Tokyo, the business groups, with their funding, Nepalese community started a Nepalese school only in Tokyo using English as a medium instruction, but it's too expensive for the most Nepali restaurant workers or students. They don't have families, but Indian schools, there are a couple of Indian schools. Again, this is private, not many, it's only in Tokyo, and then most families send their kids to Japanese public schools. It's open for anyone who wants to come, but yet instruction is completely solely in Japanese, and most Nepali families send here, but very difficult for children to retain mother tongue. So preschool is an NGO-run small school which is not available in many places. Another is a public night junior high school, again very limited. So choices are very limited. The people like Krishna and a family usually send their kids to the public schools in Japanese language. Next. And then this is a school for wealthy Nepali family and their kids in middle of Tokyo. So English medium, the Nepali curriculum, so that the kids from the Nepal would come to the school and learn instructions in English, and then when they finish, they are free to go anywhere where English is a medium. The most likely the English medium universities, not in Japan. But the program is very high tuition per kid, $40,000 per child, and challenge the small facilities, but the kids are all very active and very lively scenes that I saw. Space is always an issue in the middle of Tokyo. This principal, Mr. Pradip Thapar, represents a new wave of professionals Nepali professionals in Japan. He earned BA and MS in international relations in Japan, very well good universities, and he's now working as a professional in Tokyo. Next. So, next important group is students. This is very relevant to the current discussion of Japan's new immigration policies. So there are many Nepalese students studying in the Japanese language schools. So their goal is to learn Japanese language and then become fluent, capable of moving on to the next stage. Many of them wish to go to IT vocational schools in Japan and then move on to university. And then, luckily, if they could get the job from Japanese company. They would like to live and bring their families and live in Japan. But the Japanese language school has an incident in the 1990s with the Chinese students who wanted to come to Japan for language as well as education and employment. And then because of the scandals, many Japanese language schools are closed. And then so they were looking for some new clients. Nepalis are one of them. So Nepalis are targeted, and that means Japanese language schools are often act as a middleman between Japanese employers and the Nepalis aspiring for Japan. So students from the beginning indebted often rely on the parents' savings to come to Japan and pay for tuition, dorm, and life. And then so many of them are essentially forced to work at least 4 hours per day at minimum wages, at $9 or so. Deducting tax, it's usually they will get the $8 per hour. Many of them work in the convenience stores, restaurants, and the supermarkets, and they are filling the labor gap in Japan. Service industries are having a serious labor shortages in Japan, especially the convenience stores who opens until very late, or sometimes for 24 hours. So I learned from my interview yesterday with one Japanese language school here, some students get 3 jobs. That means they can't really hardly sleep. They can't hardly have chance to, time to work at all. So this is illegal. But they take a risk, or they are forced to take a risk of working more than 28 hours per week. So here's I got this internet, that somebody who did very well in a Japanese language school got some certificate and an award for his achievement. And then this is somebody I found in my neighborhood, in my hometown, Shizuoka, and she was working in the 7-Eleven. She was very happy. Her name was Miss Sunita Shrestha, and she goes to a language school not too far from my neighborhood. And she's been working there in the school for 4 years. And then I don't know how long she could stay on in this position. Next one. So students, how to work longer. One study done in Fukuoka with the Nepalese students, of this many students, and a quick view of what's happening is that more than 50% of Nepalese are in language schools, and then some move on to vocational schools. That means they learn Japanese language, and only 10% move on to the university level. So they are struggling. Also, they are filling the labor shortages in the Japanese industry. And the most common pattern is the language school and then vocational schools, and then move on to the university. They can stay maximum at 10 years. But unless they get the job, they will not be able to stay on. So I move on to the next one. In the meantime, because of the increasing number of Nepalese in the last 10 to 20 years, there are many small Nepalese enclaves full of sort of restaurants as well as halal food stores, or some South Asian food stores. So this is one of those in Shin-Okubo. That is a big sort of working class neighborhood, but famous for new Korean business town. But yet today there is an emergence of Nepali business communities in the middle of Shin-Okubo. When you walk through the old Korean stores, cosmetic stores, or the kind of things, you see the Nepali flags, restaurants, quite interesting. But this is a sort of the mall restaurants, and then halal food stores, and Turkish sisi kebab restaurants. And so there are many spots where a lot of different ethnic groups hanging around. So next one. And one journalist, his name is Tilak Mara. He's a publisher of Nepali newspaper. He came to Japan towards the end of 1990s, and he has observed so many changes among Nepalis in Japan. So he had a very insight I found interesting. So he said now young generations of Nepalis are coming in so many numbers. I think he was referring to the ones who are mostly students. He said these people are seeking, dreaming of life abroad without really clear plans. They are essentially depending on their parents, but they don't know what they want to do. And then family migration, yes, they are coming, and then so the children are later born in Japan. So it's moving toward more family migration. And he said something interesting to me, in my interest. There are many business owners. There are many rich Nepalese businessmen, and then they are interested in these days investing in their money, profits from their business, in their own business, not sending money back home. Because this is now their business base as well as home. Children are growing. They are more interested in using their money for their interest in Japan. And then so, Mr. Mara, in the middle of Shinho Kubo and the business community, and found the Nepali Business Association. And he's trying to get the also cooperation with other Asian ethnic business organizations such as Indonesians and Cambodians. Together they would like to pressure the local municipal government so that they would give more information in the non-Japanese or English or other language. So he was talking about this. And then many other social programs are emerging. Refugees and suicide, no schooling, divorce, alcoholism. Okay. And then so I should quick, uncertain path from sojourners to settlers. From just the quick skimming of what's happening in the Nepalese community today, I see restaurant workers and their families. Their numbers are peaked. Japanese government is not issuing the visas to the cooks anymore. And the competition among the restaurants is so high, but yet with growing small enclaves and extensive ethnic networks, those who succeeded in business might continue to stay on. And their kids are growing as Japanese. That's a question still remains. And the students, this is an interesting point. There are so many students already in Japan with the opening of Japanese labor market for more migrant workers. Their position may change, which I will discuss a little bit. And then the successful students, as I said, there is an emergence of the new wave of professionals working for Japanese companies after they finished education in Japan. So these people may move to become a long-term resident, so as these people. Others which we don't know yet. Next, yeah. And then so, this is a subject that is so really interesting to many Nepalese, I understand. That is sort of Japan fever is rising. And I saw, and whenever I went to, a lot of people asked about what is the new policy. The new policies are still being developed, and the government officials are writing so many texts, but not much of the in practice that we know of. So the new immigration policy, which was launched this month, isn't a really fundamental change in what the Japanese government is doing on unskilled migrant workers. So it's continued to be circular migration, means temporary, not settlement, no job mobility, no family, no citizenship, not to mention. So specific technical skill, it started with usually here right now level 1, level 2 hasn't come yet. And then so all the industries, but catch here, it requires N4 level Japanese test, and also the very fundamental knowledge on the skills in the industry that applicants apply for. How these tests are implemented is not yet settled, not firmly determined. So, and the other thing is the brokering institutions. Those who are already in Japan might find it easy to shift to the new category, but those who are outside Nepali, they need some kind of institutions to link them to Japanese employers. And then what kind of institutions would develop is a question that have to be addressed. Another issue which is not really discussed outside Japan is that Japan has changed the registration system for migrant workers. Any foreigners who live in Japan has to have residence card with all kinds of personal information reported to the municipal government where they live. And then all the personal information is centralized at the Immigration Bureau, and that information is also shared by other authorities, including police. And employers have to report when they hire foreigners to this Immigration Bureau. So all the information goes into the not only immigration bureaus. If something happens, it can also go to the police. So this is another aspect which not really discussed about. So MOU has been launched in April. In Japan, the N5 in Japanese test has been already given to some applicants in Japan. In the Philippines and Vietnam, they started, but the details are still being discussed. Please, next. And new law. So this is you might be interested in. So Nepali students, the technical interns who are already in Japan may move on to the new category. So those who are already in the student or these familiar industries may be able to find easy because they are not required Japanese language test, or if they are already in the industries, they are not asked to take a skill test. So, but they are allowed to stay up to 5 years. They have to return home. But if students stick to their students learning Japanese language and going to the Japanese universities and get the job, they do not have a limit on how long they can be, and also they can bring in the families. Some people with long perspectives may choose to stay on as a student. There are some people who do not want to continue to be student, paying tuition, working hard, move on to the worker status. Okay, so test in the new workers for Nepal. We don't know much about it. And I heard in July, some new exam, the language test is being scheduled. I don't know the details. Okay, moving on. So, sorry, I'm taking a long time, but this is another 20 minutes or so. Let me give you a time. So South Korea, it's a very different story. And in my earlier studies in 2005, I did a lot of visit to different communities of Nepalis. So Nepalese migrant workers on the employment permit system, and I visited the trade unions. And so I will just remind you of my interest, convergence. Both countries share the interest in labor circular migration, not long-term settlement of unskilled migrant workers. But yet implementation is very different. And civil activism is another matter. Okay, please. So here, I'll go quickly in Seoul 2005. So here, this is something I call very confrontational approach of migrant workers in Korea. Many of them at this point could be undocumented, but they are organized by the leadership of migrant workers and backed up Korean labor unions. So here, this is a big cathedral, which was a sanctuary for dissidents in the era of military dictatorship. So that is used for migrant workers, undocumented, to demonstrate their protest against the treatment that they received in Korea. And here in the behind this the mostly South Asian workers, there are 100 or 200 young Korean students and workers supporting the demonstration of migrant workers, which I couldn't imagine in Japan. Well, one more, just going back. These are Nepali workers I visited, mostly undocumented. This is a Bible study class for Nepalese workers. That someone who came to Korea was very impressed by the Christianity in Korea he encountered. He came back to Korea to become minister. So he organized his own Nepali church, very fundamental, and he was teaching Bible to Nepali workers. So these are again, this is a group of Nepalese workers who are married to Korean women. They are already organized. So the Migrant Center, this is a Korean lady in the Christian church, organizing, having a meeting with Nepalese who are probably permanent resident by then. So this is a small concert organized by the human rights organization. So this is a Pakistani guy, and they're married to a Korean woman. They have one son, so they are celebrating. This is a party for the child's birthday. And then what was so interesting to me was that this, you can see it very well, that there's a man who is standing next to the wife, Korean wife, is her father, who was the Christian minister. So you can see all this interface, as well as also really multiculturalism growing. This was a 2000. Okay, moving on. And then, so Korea employment permit system, some of you might know. So MOU, but this system was born as a child after a long struggle between NGOs, highly confrontational Korean civil activists, and small employers who wanted to keep industrial trainee systems. The Korean government finally gave up because there are so many undocumented migrant workers. They couldn't really bear the fact that so their territory was invaded by the undocumented migrant workers. So they started this system, employment permit system, and then 16 countries has MOU with Korea. And then catch is very difficult Korean test to pass. No middleman, no institutions, tied to employer. So there's no mobility once you come on the EPS. And then but this has changed since I knew. But the recent system is that if workers had trouble with the employer, beyond his own fault, he can request a change with the employers, which is very important. And then so they can stay up to 4 years and 10 months. If they stay on beyond 5 years, they are eligible for applying for citizenship. So the system terminate that kind of possibility for migrant workers to become citizens. So they can stay up to less than 5 months. The very attractive part of this program is they do earn $1,400 to $1,800 per month. I have seen this. Okay, next please. And so this is I haven't really gotten statistics yet. So here, 2018 Nepalese total, this number. So here numbers are controlled. You don't see this kind of huge gap and what different visas, but these are mostly EPS workers. 84% of EPS workers. That means government has a very clear, tight monitoring over the number of migrant workers. It's very different from Japan, as you see. So this is a point I wanted to make. Next, please. So these are the people I met. So this is a training center, quite outskirt of Seoul. But this is where migrant workers arrive. They take 2.5 days training. Primarily, how to use ATM, how to create a bank account, how to learn Korean customs. And then on the third day, their employers will come to pick them up, and they are taken to that work site. And so here, one Sunday afternoon, there was a demonstration by the migrant workers. Many of them are Nepalis, South Asian workers. And then so this is a migrant trade union, happened to be led by Udaya Rai. He was a Nepali guy, very articulate, very committed migrant trade union leader. And one of them he was introduced me to. So I interviewed him, see what he said. Okay, next one. So this one is Udaya's statement. As a leader of the migrant trade unions, he said, we are committed to raise awareness among migrant workers who are extraordinarily exploited by the Korean system. EPS itself is a symbol of inequality, according to him. And it's because employers has overwhelming power on the workers in anything. And so labor standard law applies, but in practice not equal to Koreans. And the workers are able to change up to 3 times, but they have to obtain a letter from the employer who abuses them. Of course, it's so difficult to get the letter to begin with. And then so Nepali workers, not only Nepalis and many others, suffer from low wages, mistreatment, but Nepali workers are often depressed because very intense, heavy, long-hour work, very substandard accommodation often. He said, this is something interesting that Udaya told me, Nepalis can be more vulnerable than other workers such as Thais and Vietnamese and Indonesian because they are more well-educated. 30% of Nepalis come with a BA. So they are middle-class kids and they are so excited that they pass the exam and are going to Korea and earn lots of money. Reality was not that. That is, they found reality unbearably harsh. But one thing he noted, Nepalis know how to handle, the life abroad. So they are always having networking. There are a number of Janajati ethnic associations and many other associations. There are a small enclave of restaurants and Nepali things. So they are happy. At least one aspect. So moving on. So Oja, the guy I interviewed, said he passed the Korean language. He had to come from his Terai household family to Kathmandu to learn Korean language, so he invested his time and money for that. He passed it, and he came, and the first job that was heavy, wire cutting, very heavy lifting, carrying, and a very verbal, abusive foreman, quite scary. And metal container box was his home. Second job. Plastic factory, working hours 8 to 8, too much work, but he earned $1,700. And so there are Nepali, Bangladesh, Pakistani, all these, they are in the same dome, they are talking in Hindi. Third job, this was where he was when I met him. He was happy, big company, 40 Korean workers and then 14 foreign workers with health insurance. And he was earning $1,800 per month, from which he sent $1,300 to home. And so he also noted that there is a lot of abusive employers and who drive the Nepali workers very vulnerable to become undocumented. Okay, next. And then another one I just interviewed a few days ago in Kathmandu. So he was a returnee from Nepal. So he went to Korea soon after the EPS was launched. So that's a period, still not many Nepali knew much about this. So he took Korean language courses and then learned it, took the exam. He said it was very easy. So he passed it, and then, but the first job was, salary was too low. He had only 1 year contract, so he switched to the next one. But before that, he said something interesting. There are many Korean employees, co-workers who was abusive to foreign workers. So he said to them, I am from Nepal. Nepal government and then Korean government has an agreement so that I am here to work. I am doing my best. If you have that behavior toward us, I will bring the case to the authority. And then at that point, Korean workers stop abusive behavior. So this is a very important resistance means. Another is that the second job, day and night, he couldn't bear. And then third job he was very happy with. He finished the job, I did very well. It was the cleaning, it was a meat center, meat processing center. He was cleaning the intestine of the pigs and then make it clean and then ready to ship out to the meat shops. That's what he was doing. He was earning $1,500. And so upon return, he was able to build a house, rent stores, runs a small cafe, send son to university. He was a success case. And he was very happy. And then what he learned, of course, this kind of economic, financial gains, but at the same time he said, I learned so much from this work, hard work. We have to work hard. Nepali gossiping all around. Not, rather, time is everything. That's what he came up with, entrepreneurial spirit. And he's successful. So, here. All right, next one. I'll just go quickly. This is a small center by the Korean civil society for undocumented kids. Kindergarten, it's a daycare. And this is a shelter for Nepali women who are in transition. They had trouble with their former employers, so they are looking for new employers. In the meantime, they have no place to go. So activists, Nepalese, came up with this small apartment as a shelter. And so this is a Lakshmi Gulen, who is an activist. She herself runs a Nepali restaurant. And so this is a small Nepali town in the midst of Seoul. Next. I'll finish my discussion so that we have some time for answer and question and answer. So, Japan and Korea suffer same issues: aging labor force, resistance to immigration, but yet they choose circular migration. They don't want to have anyone to come stay with the family forever. So they want to get rid of them after a certain time. But the way government intervenes in the policy implementation, I found different. And civil society, how civil society support or not support is different between the two countries. So, Nepalese in Japan, without Japanese government intervention very much, remind you that Prime Minister Abe kept telling Japan is not a country of immigration. That means there was no system of integrating migrant communities, populations and families into Japanese society. So they have to come up with their own networks and niches. And then so, with a new policy, which is still very much for sojourning, for unskilled levels, so there's one choice for students, from students to become unskilled workers under the new policy, or some people continue to be students to universities and then get a job to become professionals and then become permanent residents. Or restaurant workers from long-term resident who they are right now and a permanent resident. But in Korea, there's no mistake. They can't stay long. Because government has a very clear idea. These people are one of the many MOU countries where EPS workers come. So there may be some changes. Students may increase, entrepreneurs increase, and professionals increase. Who knows? So what I found in two countries, Nepalese on global migrants have to continue to look for better opportunities. East Asia is not heaven, paradise to them. Okay, thank you. That's my presentation.
Thank you, Professor Yamanaka, for that very interesting, insightful immigration situations in two countries, in Japan and South Korea. As I said at the beginning, I myself have a lot of memories of having lived in Japan in the 1990s that you talked about. I had to wait for 6 months to meet another Nepali at that time. And I hear now that that town, Fukuoka, is flooded with Nepalese, one of the hubs for Nepalese workers and students. And this new policy that Japan has introduced, as you mentioned, is already controversial within Japan itself. We are to see how this will actually help the lives of Nepalese. More on that and my reflections later, perhaps. We'll open the floor for questions to Professor Yamanaka. Please raise your hand and make your question as precise as possible. We have maybe about 30 minutes for Q&A. Yes, I see the hand here first.
I have two questions. Thank you. First of all, thank you. And first one is what kind of grabbed my attention is why there is after 2013 onwards decline in the skilled migrants.
Oh, the restaurant workers?
The table you have shown where the skilled migrants percentage year-wise and the family and the students migrating to Japan. And
okay.
2013 onwards, the skilled migration percentage has been declined. So I was just curious, is it linked to the EPS or something else?
I don't think so. It's just a dip because they came back. You know, they rose again in numbers. So I don't know what happened, but I don't think it's a really big shift.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then another one is I would like to know the linkage of Japan's own aging population and 2019 new law on the Nepalese. Is there anything?
It's about labor shortages. They don't really refer to the population decline or aging population, but the aging population means aging labor forces. That means labor shortages. So this new program address labor shortages. The one which still in practice, technical training system is officially for transferring skills from Japan to developing societies. It's only theory. In practice, it's a worker program. But the government does not admit that. So, but this time they admit that Japan needs labor force to work in 3D jobs. 3D means difficult, dangerous, demanding. No Japanese people want to take. So again, they admitted labor shortages. And then for that, we need workers from mostly Asian countries.
Thank you.
Yes, I see
First of all, thank you so much for your thorough and wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
So my question is, according to the 2019 new immigration policy embraced by Japan, I was wondering what motivation or intention was behind this move. Is it going to make the dynamics for Nepali workers or students easier in Japan? Or is it aimed to filter out a certain category of migrants that Japan may be facing difficulty with, in your opinion?
The third issue you said to eliminate, filter out those who are not desired. I don't think that's an issue. So it's more, as I answered to her, it's addressing labor shortages in the industries that need lots of workers. You know, so there are 14 industries that designated under this specific skill categories. So many are service industries and manufacturing, and some are highly, you know, it's not more skilled. So clear that this is for labor shortages. Did I answer your question?
Hello, my name is Ayudas Pariyar. I really love your presentation, and I was here especially for this purpose because makes scholarship 2020. That's what I'm trying to apply, and I'm about to research in the same kind of topic. My topic would be work ethics. So here's my question to you. Japanese work ethics, as we all know, is extremely competitive and formidable, resilient, and self-supportive, and years of homogeneous practice of Japanese societies within themselves have created their own Japanese world, as we know. My question is, what policy will Japan incorporate to address the heterogeneity that this labor market opening might possibly bring in Japan?
The question you asked probably more relevant to skilled migrant workers, right? Unskilled migrant workers do not go to even that level of, they essentially work on the jobs that do not have much interactions with others or negotiating anything or not using Japanese language probably. There's no mobility. But the people there are people who might be concerned about this kind of work ethics in Japanese style are the professionals who finish the Japanese university and move on to the employment in Japanese companies. So they may find Japanese system of management sort of difficult to penetrate because it's an internal labor market system. New workers the batch of selected new workers come at the bottom, very narrow competitive entry. Now once you enter, the future elite workforce will move around different jobs and it's slowly moving up. So that kind of style, all in Japanese, all network, old boy network within it, might be very difficult for foreign people or skilled workers, professionals who want to find a good job, good earnings, and move on to next. Japan's style of highly bureaucratic, highly sort of order, age, seniority based, not really suit their interest. So this is a challenge for Japanese corporations, but the smaller organizations are much more flexible. They may be able to fit. That means, if you choose a smaller, more innovative corporations, maybe more interesting, giving more challenge, but still unstable in terms of business, as well as the salaries may not be as good as other big corporations. These things are very widely discussed right now. But Japan's situation is, it's a monolingual country, and then for English-speaking, highly mobile, aspiring professionals, including Nepalis, Japan find it too slow, too tight. There are some issues that you have to adjust as a professionals in Japan.
Thank
you. Yes.
Sorry, I was late. You might have addressed this in the beginning. When I was reporting for the Nepali Times from Japan on migration, Nepali migration, I was told that the number of Nepalese workers switching their status to political asylum was actually growing, and it was number 3 after Vietnam and Indonesia. I just wondered, and this was a year ago, I wondered if the trend is increasing or decreasing.
I often heard of it. I think these are the people who exhausted means to stay on in Japan. So they tried Japanese language schools and special professional schools, but they didn't do well, or they didn't have enough resources. So final choice for them is to apply for refugee status. Many of them used the civil war, Maoist attack on them families. But by now, I think Japanese lawyers and authorities knew these may not be substantiated. So it's a means for the people without much means anymore to just stay on. So I do not know much about literature on this in Japanese language, but these are kind of rumors that I hear.
Yes. Prerogative. I was talking to a Japanese professor recently, and she was telling me about these different newspapers now focusing on Nepali workers in Japan, and publishing different incidents related to Nepal is not always positive, of course, because of different incidents happening. And that was, in its own way, gaining more and more attention and highlighting the state of the migrant workers.
Nihon Shimbun
Yes.
has a special, you know, because of the Fukuoka is a hub of Nepalese students. So they focus quite a lot about change in the population in Fukuoka, focusing on Nepalese. They sent correspondents to Nepal and did all, you know, they have a book. I would say the population goes up, crime goes up. There are always people who are doing some underground things. I wouldn't worry. Well, there are certain negative campaigns by Japanese media against foreign workers. But at the same time, there are many NGOs and Japanese citizens who support and a correct wrong statement by the media. And there's a lot of fight between people who are concerned about correct multiculturalism and then migrant workers and then their struggle to survive in Japan. And the media who pick up this kind of negative issues. There are battles going on right now. Yeah, so there are always people who fight back. Fake news. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you for the presentation. So, like globally, there is an anti-immigration kind of discourse, as well as social perception throughout the world. And how is it in Korea and Japan? Like how society perceives immigrants? So, like, is the government acting as per the social perception? Like negative social perception regarding the immigrants coming and settling in Japan?
You're talking about welfare or
social
institutional incorporation?
Yeah.
Or sort of cultural?
And also like, you know, like foreigners coming and taking jobs or like disrupting the culture, social environment. So that is one question. And the second one is, you talked about like social activism in Korea, and that is helping at least in systematizing the labor migration from like Nepal and other source countries to Korea, and it has dramatically reduced the cost of labor migration, although there are other issues. But do you think like why such social activism cannot take place in Japan, or do you think it would help at least in formulating similar policies similar to that of Korea?
The first question reminded me of one more time. Can you reiterate?
That is about general social perception regarding the immigrants.
In East Asia, Korea and Japan both have not yet seen or witnessed huge rise of right-wing anti-immigration movement. There are some. In case of Japan, right-wing hate speech has become a social issue, but these ultra-right activists are targeting Koreans, descendants of colonial migrants who live in the certain areas. So they sent the loud demonstration with a very hateful speech. But the Japanese government has come to this at least law that prohibit hate speech. So the new global migrants, I would call, have not yet become a target of hate by the Japanese citizens, at least. And concerning the job competition between Japanese workers and migrant workers, this has not happened yet. There are certainly the older workers who compete in this segment of labor market may seem their jobs are limited when young, very sort of hardworking migrant workers come to their workplace. There are certain discussions about it, but not yet the big angle yet. The second question you asked was, I'm sorry again, the civil activities. Why Korea has this huge support for migrant workers? I did study myself. I published a number of articles on this subject. I think it's Korea's modernization history. After Korea became independent after the World War II, it was a colony of Japan. So after Korean War ended, the Korean, the President Park, who is a military general, took in charge of the rapid industrialization. So lots of migrant workers, many of them are young women, worked on assembly lines for quite long hours with low wages. And then they used, this is a military dictatorship that lasted over 2 or 3 decades. And then finally, the Korean people came up with a resistance, led by one student. And then religious workers, many of them are Catholic, Protestant, progressive forces, and also rural migrant workers. So all of them coordinated their resistance against military dictatorship, overthrown it in 1987. So 1987 is just 5 years before the arrival of migrant workers from so-called Third World. So the spirit of resistance, confrontation with the authority, continued in the minds of activists in Korea. So human rights is a daily language in Korean civil society as well as citizens. You know, you remember just 5 years or so, incumbent lady president was impeached. She's now serving for life in jail. And then president before that was also accused of corruption. He's also in jail. It's all about how strong is Korean civil society. Not only very, active activists, but also ordinary citizens participating in that kind of resistance, challenge to the authority. I think it's a political culture that deserves a lot of attention. Japan is different. Japan is a country of order, safety, non-taking risk, negotiation. You got to negotiate with the different parties and then move on the consensus. That's my observation from my work. That's it. Did I answer?
1 or 2 more questions perhaps, if there are any. There seem to be... Shall I take it that way? Well, maybe my one last comment and a question to you to end this thing. I'm not going to wrap up what you said. I can do that, but you very interestingly pointed out the subtle difference between the Japanese culture and the South Korean culture. Japanese, as you said, are very subtle and they don't really show their feelings. So there is a big debate of on or around Nihonjin Ron. What does it mean to be a Japanese, so to say? And how can foreigners integrate into the Japanese society? This particular policy as well highlights that one, emphasizes one particular word that I was really interested in, integration of foreign workers in Japanese society. But what does that mean? How do you do that? That's if it were in Korea, I would think it would be pretty more vocal, more explicit, whereas Japanese have that word, but they are also, I think, as you said, figuring it out how to do it. Because one very interesting fact is that the government, Japanese government itself, the cabinet members themselves, not all are for this policy. There was a lot of debate and criticism from within the government itself. So that shows that there is some reluctance as well, but because of the labor shortage, because of the low birth rate, they have to do it.
Yeah.
No?
Yeah.
So my question, perhaps the final question is, do you think that Japanese society has to change over the years? It has to accept it more explicitly?
Yeah. First of all, Japan is already very multicultural. On the surface, it may look similar, but if you're in the middle of Shinjuku, the city I showed you, if you talk to somebody on the corner, he or may not understand Japanese. There are so many Chinese people, the East Asian looking people, Koreans, who cannot really distinguish by appearance. And so this is a big cities. But in the rural areas, I studied the Filipino women community in the very rural areas who were once worked in the bar as a hostess, and then they met their husband in the bar, and they married, and then they raised the families. I'm talking about throughout Japan. So because Filipino so-called entertainers, they are not sex workers, remind you. They are bar hostesses to please Japanese men with the drinks. So quarter is serving many drinks to Japanese clients, but they are spread. They were sent throughout Japan. So in a very small town, you will find a small community of Filipino women raising families, the children becoming now teenage university students and a Japanese citizen. So it's so much. If you look at the Japan from the top, or if you look at from bottom at the grassroots, different. I have seen this. And the Nepalis they are undocumented, but they are completely free to move around that period. And so I had a reunion of 4 Nepali guys who returned to Pokhara just a week ago. They reminisce Japan. Oh, that was my best time. We went to everywhere. We meet these people, and we had wonderful food. Oh, that time will never come back. They are now in their 50s, raising children. It tells something different when you look for the population that is sort of sharing life with Japanese people. Well, of course, most Japanese people do not have much exposure to different people, different language. But again, that means they are always exclusionary. But I have seen different aspects of Japan. Yeah.
Sure. Well, times are changing certainly, and everywhere I think it holds true. I guess we'll have to end there this time, Professor Yamanaka. Thank you very much. It was very
insightful. Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening.
And as a small token of thanks, I'd like to present you this. And it was really wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
And we will